Something I've noticed in gaming YouTube lately is that there's a general lack of good discourse around action games. While there's definitely a solid understanding of balancing frustration with reward, this seems to be the only point of significance I usually see, with the rest of the talk around these games ultimately devolving into it's like other games from my childhood or it's hard but fun. There seems to be a divide between understanding of narrative and understanding of game design. And narrative seems to be the thing that's easiest to discuss because we're bombarded with stories from the day we're born. We pick up on tropes and norms, and we can form a basis of criticism easier with the growing number of channels and essay sites that explore narrative construction or meaning. Game design discourse still seems to be lagging a bit outside small circles. The response to Cuphead as of late has gotten my wheels turning in my head and really highlighted this problem for me, as countless reviews and discussions come back to comparing it to Contra, or being surprised it focused on boss battles over shooting levels. I want to give a basic overview of design in action games and try to explain some of these decisions and similarities between these games, and I think I can do that best with Ian Campbell's Bleed Duology. The quality of both games in the series is night and day, yet with minimal change between the first and second game. The changes that are made in the second game, though, make the whole experience feel completely different and far more exciting. They're both a great example of a developer growing in their craft, and also examples of what does and doesn't work in action games. The first Bleed has you controlling a girl named Wynne, who wants to be the world's greatest hero. To accomplish this goal, she decides to kill all the other major heroes on the Earth, all of whom look more like generic video game mini-bosses than heroes. It structures itself like Suda51's No More Heroes, with a list of targets to hunt down, each with their own level to get through before you can face them, drenched in a layer of self-aware meta-humor. You can use the points you earn from stages to buy new weapons, and points can be earned by making stylish moves and attacks in combat. Wynne's moveset is fun and occasionally difficult to control, making pulling off stylish slow-mo shots and dodges all the more satisfying. She can rocket around with an air dash instead of a regular jump, gaining a lot of height or distance depending on what direction you choose to go, but it comes at the cost of a sense of control. It's like trying to control a 2D Sonic speed in midair with no startup time, which makes the slow-mo mechanic more central. You have a timer bar that lets you know how long you can use the slow-mo for and when it fully refills so you can use it again. You have to pay attention to the timer or else you're going to die a lot. A vast majority of the obstacles in the game require the added control slow-mo provides, even on high-level play. The slow-mo power and that ridiculous air dash make for great foundations for the game, but little's actually done with them, at least in a satisfying way. The majority of the game is based around navigating large, empty levels and moving through uninteresting obstacles. Trying to blast through falling rocks and moving through a basic corridor does not for an exciting game make. Even when these levels have something to them, like the race against the clock nature of the Dragons level, it manages to be more frustrating than anything else. Getting through these levels feels more like a chore than something exciting, especially in the Dragon stage. It's the boss battles where Bleed starts to shine and what ultimately saves the game. Every boss fight is memorable in some way, like having to learn your placement on the ground against the worms so they don't attack you unexpectedly, or use your slow-mo power to pelt the Eyebot with bullets before its shield goes back into place. They're designed much like classic quarter muncher baddies, but not nearly as cheap and death-inducing. They all have tells and patterns you can follow, and they all have strategies you can pick up on. The rival fight at the game's end stands out as the best of them all thanks to his shifting arsenal, keeping you on your toes. It's a shame that your own loadout of weapons is lackluster. The dual pistols you get at the start, along with the flamethrower and homing missiles you can earn later, are the only weapons of any real worth, mainly because the levels are designed with the pistols in mind, while everything else works well in different situations to bolster your offensive options. The flamethrower deals well with nearby swarms, and the homing missiles hit hard to reach enemies that can let you keep your mind more focused on evading during boss fights. There's no reason to get any other weapon, especially the slow firing and limited range laser and the awkward shotgun that actually has kickback and can send you to your death outside of self-imposed challenge. It's a bit of a problem when these extra weapons are treated like rewards. They aren't empowering or particular fun weapons to play with, they're just frustrating. Bleed is an enjoyable but clunky experience, and if not for the novelty of Rin's odd movements and slow-mo powers, it's hard to say the game would have much of a presence. Its sequel took 5 years to finish, and that time was spent wisely, taking note of what didn't work design-wise, but more importantly, what did. As a result, Bleed 2 ended up feeling like a completely different experience, despite having the same basic foundation as the first. What makes it so much better is the shift in focus from platforming challenges to boss fights and enemy gauntlets that contain their own tricks to keep the player engaged. On top of this, an optional mechanic from the first game was made into a central mechanic for the base game in 2, bullet deflection. Bleed 2 starts with the pistols and the former extra weapon katana now functioning together as one weapon. You can hold for a steady stream of fire from the pistols, but every press of the fire button also has the katana swipe at the same time the pistols fire. If a purple bullet is swiped by the katana, it is reflected back in the direction you're aiming, giving Win not only offensive and evasion options, but defensive options that offer a new offensive ability. The game makes the most of this mechanic from the first level, with multiple bosses that require the mechanic to defeat, or at least thrive against, including one that glows purple with a charging attack that can be reflected like a bullet for massive damage. You learn everything you need to know from the first level. The rest is mastering those skills as new obstacles and enemies are thrown at you and test you in different ways. Bleed 2's story has Win going up against her first villain, who brings the fight to her en masse. The game starts with an alien invasion, and the entirety of it outside the epilogue segment with a rival is fighting through the invasion and finally facing the big bad, a psychic woman who uses her minions as weapons. She is Win's opposite in every way, an intelligent person who fights others instead of fighting herself, her mind used as a weapon instead of her body, quite literally. The narrative isn't substantial here either, but the premise it creates ends up allowing for a completely different sense of pacing and level design. Instead of one main boss level and an occasional fight with the rival's mechs, every level is some sort of spectacle marathon littered with mini-bosses and a big challenging boss at the end. Every boss is designed like both a reflex challenge and a puzzle. With a weak point you have to make clear, patterns to explore, and moves to learn how to counter or even avoid triggering. One of the early bosses, the Cyborg Samurai, can deflect bullets in a certain stance and require slow-mo or ultra-fast reflexes to avoid its teleport attack or reflect it. It's a great teacher for the remainder of the game. Anything and everything will and can be thrown at you, and you have to be prepared. A boss not long after actually affects the fighting field itself, as you're fighting in mid-air and have to jump from missile to missile it's firing in order to stay in the air while trying to get in position to deal out damage, watching your distance so you're not too close or too far so you can properly counter an attack. No boss is the same as last, and eventually lessons and strategies learned from past bosses start adding up against more complex bosses that use bits and pieces of their earlier patterns. Bleed 2 makes countless more improvements from the sprite art to the absolutely fantastic score, but its design shift is what benefits it the most. It's all about volume and complexity in one-on-one fights, complete with 2 boss gauntlets against old enemies from the first game that feels completely new. It takes little under 2 hours to initially finish, with plenty of extra modes, characters, and weapons to play with, much like the first game. The difference is that all this empty space is now filled with mechanical set pieces that keeps you guessing. It removes platforming challenges for arcade chaos and benefits massively from this. A good action game needs to keep you engaged with the action, and there's different ways to do it. Not a Hero creates a sense of rhythm and flow in combat and going through the level itself. Broforce makes everything destructible and forces creative strategies with randomized character selection. Cuphead benefits from pure pattern-focused challenge, and Bully 2's strategy is sheer volume and variety, with bosses building on each other for new challenges. It's not just being like Contra or Metal Slug, it's understanding what engages a player mechanically, picking a few concepts and building a game around that. The reason so many of these action games, especially 2D action games, take from those early foundations is because they're foundations. What you do with them is what defines them. Bully 2 is a masterclass in action game design with complete focus and identity realized. It takes that familiar foundation we all knew already and makes a new experience, as do the best of its genre always do. Hopefully, we'll see more action games like it.